Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Adam, part of the marketing team at ISC Research. I'm delighted to welcome you this morning to our Edruptors Live Leadership, Culture, and School Communities. I'll be handing over to Janelle, our main host, very shortly. But before I do have a few housekeeping points. As always, with any live online event, if you do have any tech issues, our first port of call is perhaps the most basic, and it's to log off and log back in again. If that doesn't fix it, then please use the Q&A functionality to let us know, and we'll see if we can do anything on our side. That takes me to the Q&A function as well. This will be a panel discussion. There'll be plenty of opportunities for you to submit your questions. We will have some time at the end for those. So any questions that come up during the conversation, please put them in there, and we'll put them to our panelists later in the session. And finally, this session is being recorded. Anyone who is registered will get the recording directly, and we'll also be sharing it via our various social media channels afterwards. That's it from me. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Janelle Torres, one of our field research managers, to start us off proper. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Janelle Torres, Research Manager for Southeast Asia at ISC Research, and you are watching Edruptors Live. International education is going through a significant change. Schools today are navigating new expectations around leadership, culture, and the role they play within the communities. According to the Global International Schools Snapshot 2026, international schools are evolving from institutions originally designed for expatriate families into schools that increasingly serve local communities and local demand. Here in the next slide, we'll look at the global landscape, and the figures are remarkable. Today, there are over 15,000 international schools worldwide, educating 7.7 million students and employing more than 730,000 staffs. Together, these schools generate around $69 billion in annual fee income. What this tells us is that international education is no longer a niche sector. It has become a major global education ecosystem. And when a sector reaches this level of scale, the next question becomes, how is it evolving? According to this next slide, the data highlights three major shifts shaping international education today. First is bilingual education is expanding rapidly, with 36% of international schools now offering bilingual pathways that combine global curricula with local language and culture. Second, school groups are becoming more influential, with around 40% of schools now part of a larger network, bringing greater scale and consistency across the sector. And third, we're seeing a growing move toward digital and competency based assessment models, changing how learning is evaluated. And together, these shifts show that international education isn't just growing, it's transforming. But data only tells part of the story. So, in this next slide, to really understand what this transformation looks like in practice, it's important to hear directly from the leaders who are driving change in their schools and organizations. Today, I'm joined by two Edruptors, Zubia Ahmed and Rhiannon Phillips Bianco, influencers who are challenging traditional models and helping shape the future of international education. But rather than me introducing them, I'll invite each of them to briefly introduce themselves and share a little about their role and the work they're involved in. Zubia, let's start with you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Janelle. Thank you, ISC Research, for having me. A wonderful, exciting topic for us to discuss. Something that's my life's work, 20 years going through school leadership, moving into quality assurance, quality improvement, and now advisory at a systems level and school group level. So I'm very excited to talk with you, with Rhiannon, and kind of get to the heart of the matter with you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Hi
Zubia.
everybody, I'm
Rhiannon.
Rhiannon. Yeah, it's great to be here. It's a real privilege to be joining this conversation. I've been in international education for 25 years in a range of different roles, based in the UK, in Italy and the Netherlands. My current role is Head of Wellbeing for Globe Educate, which is a group that has 65 schools in 11 countries. And I have the privilege and the challenge of working on developing our wellbeing provision, which, as we know, in our constantly evolving world, something as important as well-being needs to constantly evolve as well. So very much learning every day, and white papers such as this really support me and the rest of the group in understanding where trends are going and understanding how we can respond to them.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Again, welcome Zubia and Rhiannon. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Kai Vasher was also meant to join us for this conversation, but unfortunately, he's unable to be with us today given the current developments in the Middle East. So to start our conversation, I'd like to ask each of you for a quick reaction. Looking at the snapshot of trends in the Global Snapshot 2026, which findings stood most to you and why? Let's begin with you, Zubia.
Okay, so as somebody who advises school groups and who works predominantly in the Gulf region, I have some work in Europe and the UK where I'm from, but the company I work for, predominantly Verdant and Co., we give advisory and school development support in the Gulf region. And what we're seeing across the major cities in the Gulf is locally driven growth, which kind of aligns with the findings. And that's the finding that stood out for me because it kind of corroborates and it matches what we see. The demand from citizens and foreign, non-foreign residents, which was the kind of driving factor before. We're seeing many more local families discerningly select the kind of schooling they want their child to have. I see it as a kind of locally rooted demand, but with an international credibility. So they want their child to have the option and the flexibility to be recognized with their qualifications anywhere they may want to go or study or for higher education or otherwise. But they want their child to know their local context, be in their motherlingual setting, and for it not to be a borrowed identity that comes from that. So that's from the parent perspective. From the school's perspective, there's a lot more pressure on the schools to identify their unique DNA and know themselves in the context and serve their communities in ways that are more embedded in culture and interactional, rather than just sort of like an event that happens and people attend and that's it. It's kind of like an ongoing rolling dialogue of community spirit that people are looking for. And I think post-COVID, that's even more the case of all the disruptions. And in the Middle East now, with all the challenges that are happening and the switch to remote learning, it's become even more of an issue there. And lastly, children. I'm a fourth culture person. I was born and raised in the UK, but I've been everywhere in many different countries, worked in different countries, and I have children. So I'm a parent too. So what I want for my children is that rigor, but then the wings. I want them to have wings and have that freedom to explore the world, have a multicultural sense of belonging, but rooted in the local. So that's my answer there.
Thank you, Zubia. And that's really interesting because when you've mentioned about the local demand, that's what we are also seeing when we interview international schools in the countries that we look after. Rhiannon, I'd love to bring you in here and ask you, how about you? What stood out to you when it comes to the global snapshot?
Well, yeah, what stood out to me was the increase in the number of schools that are affiliated to school groups, which of course is something that I noticed as someone I work now for a school group, but I've also for many years I've worked in standalone schools, and I also worked in a school that had 5 campuses in one city. So I've kind of experienced the full range of the incredible benefits it brings being part of a group, and also the challenges. And of course, I need to look through the well-being lens in my role to see how we can reap those benefits and meet the challenges. So of course, from a well-being perspective, schools that are part of a group really benefit from strong guidance, clear policies, strong reference points when they're dealing with more complex cases on a safeguarding level, that extra level, someone else to go to who can give really strong guidance. And I think that's enormously important for schools. And of course, a really strong pool of resources that they feel that they can use that are readily available to them. So those benefits are there, and an enormous benefit to schools, and we get great response to that. On the opposite side, what we need to be really careful of is, of course, being based in 11 countries, there are huge cultural sensitivities around a topic like well-being. We can't create a one-size-fits-all model and just expect every school to adopt it, follow it, and say, yep, this is great, this works for us. So the core approach really of the group is to provide that guidance and the resources, but also to have strong flexibility so that schools can benefit from it, but then think, okay, how can we use locally based teams and knowledge and understanding with cultural sensitivity to respond? Just thinking about last term, for example, our wellbeing focus was healthy relationships, and it touched on topics such as consent and how to support LGBTQ students. Really important topics, but within different countries, very, very different levels of sensitivity and even legal implications within some countries as well. So our goal really is to provide very clear guidance so schools feel supported in terms of wellbeing, but then say to them, please adapt them to suit your needs. And I think as we see the growth in schools that are affiliated to groups, and having spoken to colleagues who've worked for other groups, I think it's really important that on a group level we have that open-mindedness, and we don't expect that the copy and paste model of every school within our group, whichever country they're in, needs to be doing exactly the same thing. That cultural sensitivity is enormously important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rhiannon. Let's pick up on one of the themes that's becoming increasingly visible, and Zubia has touched on this: the shift towards locally driven demand. International schools today are serving more local families who want global education while staying connected to their cultural identity. Rhiannon, I'd like to stay with you and ask, what does this shift mean for student identity and belonging?
I think that there are a range of different, again, benefits and challenges within this. One that really jumps out to me within the communities that I work with is the importance of, excuse me, if you have an increase in local students, and of course you will still have your international students, is ensuring that everyone feels like they belong and you don't have a strong division between here are the local students, here are the internationals, and we don't really mix. So a bit as Zubir was saying, that it's really important to families that our young people have a strong sense of identity and culture of their own, which is quite right. And locally driven market will ensure that our local students have that. But how do we ensure that our international students feel that they're a part of that as well? So I think it comes down to each school creating their own unique culture so everybody feels part of something within their school, as well as appreciating the local culture and as well as feeling that there's space for their own international experiences. And I know later on we'll talk more about the bilingual pathways, but I think when we're talking about identity, the topic of language is enormously important in this, because our languages are so fundamental for our identities. And if we have more local students, the challenge can often be, of course, for most of our schools, the core language is English. We want to provide all the opportunities possible for our students to speak in English, which within a classroom context, we can succeed quite easily. But when they go to the playground, what will the dominant language be there? Does If it's the local language, does that mean that our international students don't feel included, that they have a greater sense of isolation? How can we ensure that we have a common language, largely, nearly always English? How can we ensure that that happens? Or in our bilingual schools, how can we ensure that there's a balance? And I learned something really important from my daughters in this. They're 20 now, and they study in the UK for university, but they went through the international school system. And initially they were in an international school where there were about 65% Italian children. So in the playground, it was a really challenge to get the children to speak in English, real challenge to get them to speak in English. And teachers were constantly reminding them and rewarding them for speaking in English, and please don't speak in Italian. I did it there myself. I was a teacher there, and I thought that was what was important. And then we moved to the Netherlands, where we had 5% local children and 80 different languages. And my daughters came home from school at the age of 9, they're twins, and they came home really excited after just a few days and said, it's amazing. If we speak in Italian, people get excited and they celebrate it, because they're having 80 languages. English was automatically the common language. So the multilingualism of the students was seen as a real celebration. Let's find the opportunity for you to meet other children who speak your language, celebrate your identity, your culture. And that was the first time I realized, after 4 years of them being in an English school, that they had learned it's a bad thing to speak one of my languages at school. And that was a real moment for me as a parent and as an educator to think, okay, and particularly now with this increase in locally driven markets, how can we ensure that our children in school feel that their languages are equally celebrated, valued, an important part of their identity, rather than insisting on one or another and being, how can we ensure that we're not dictating it too much? So I think that's a real challenge for us in this.
Thank you. Thank you, Rhiannon. Ensuring that everyone belongs, not only locals, but also expatriates. And I like what you've mentioned about celebrating all identities and culture and languages as well. But are you also seeing, a follow-up to that is, are you seeing expectations from local families that somehow differ from those traditionally associated with expatriate communities now in school, now that the demographics have changed?
Well, as Zubia mentioned at the beginning, that as being a fourth culture kid, our third culture kids, as they were called for a long time, our expatriate families, there's always been a kind of strong expectation for supporting them in their well-being with the transitions and the grief and the loss that they naturally experience as part of that. And very often they come from a series of international schools where there's been strong well-being guidance and support. So they arrive and that expectation is there. Where I see that this is really interesting in terms of local families is if we have lots of international families from lots of different perspectives, they tend to arrive in a school and they accept the school's approach because there are so many different perspectives. It's a kind of, right, let's have trust in the school to go with this. If you have lots of local families, it tends to be the local perspective that they expect needs to dominate. And we found, in my experience, that's been quite challenging in some countries within our group, where the expectation, the cultural expectation is that well-being and mental health are only for mental health professionals to deal with within school, that it's not the role of an educator. And I found that it's been more, for example, within Italy, it's been Italian parents who've challenged us on that, whereas our expatriate international families who've had that range of experience of lots of different wellbeing provision find it the norm. Our Italian families, to the point where I've been challenged for teaching a child a breathing strategy because I'm not a qualified psychologist. So a real kind of difference in perception of roles and understanding of roles. So that's really quite interesting because, of course, if you've got lots of international families, in terms of your wellbeing provision, perhaps you can be more directive about it. But of course, if you've got more local families, you really need to consider the local culture very, very carefully, and ensure that you're meeting those needs and recognizing if you're within a culture where a mental health professional is important in these roles, that needs to be respected, I think.
That is really both interesting but also challenging. Zabia, from the strategic side of the sector, are schools fully repositioned for this shift, or are many still operating in an older international school model?
The interesting thing here is some are positioned with intent to create the kind of best practice and research driven sense of belonging, equity, curriculum redesign, and multilingual pathways, community. But some schools have an advantage in how long they've already been running sometimes. Especially international schools, the original kind of not-for-profit schools that were embassy linked and were funded to begin, those that are 50 years plus old, they generally have established a culture that's incrementally developed over time. So they've sprouted roots that have become really thick and strong. And that reputation then permeates to key communities of that particular embassy, for example. But then you also have, more recently in the Gulf, a lot of brand new schools opening, schools that are 0 to 3 years old, a lot of schools 5 to 8 years old. And those schools have usually really big numbers, and also they're kind of under financial model pressure to operate the school, and serve a community with the product of education, if that makes sense. So in that takes a lot more time for a school to develop its people connection, and with transience of staff, with the changing policy in the Gulf. For example, early years literacy has become a lot more prevalent. Early years literacy, because of the things that Rihanna mentioned, that in the playgrounds, if early years literacy focuses on the language of instruction earlier, you're going to have more children using the language of instruction because it's been introduced sooner. And that policy change has been introduced more recently, particularly in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. So moving forward in the coming academic year, there are now mandatory guidelines on what are local requirements for even early years Arabic, which previously were not there. Another interesting point that while Rhiannon was talking, I scribbled down some of my notes here, look, are the unfreeze that has to happen within a school community. When we go in as strategic advisors and a school is on a journey, every school's on a journey, and every school's an improving school. Anyone who's been to any of my trainings, I say this every time. Every school is an improving school. Every school is unique. Even in a group, you might have siblings, but you don't have twins. It's just not the case. Every school's got its spirit and soul and heartbeat that beats in its own pattern. So when you have a development to happen in a school, there's an unfreeze. We have to kind of melt things down and mold them and then refreeze them temporarily in order for those roots, that germination process to happen for whichever development we're trying to embed there. So yeah, it depends. So my answer is very mixed. I gave you a wishy-washy answer, but it's kind of like a complex picture, because you've got very well-rooted schools who have their own sense of DNA, which are equipped and capable of dealing with shocks because they have that rootedness and the funds sometimes. And then you've got schools in bigger groups who feel a kind of cookie cutterish pressure, but at the same time, they've got an on-roll to build, and culture is happening really, really fast, and it's kind of like sweeping them along the tide. And then you have schools that are maybe perhaps standalone, which are few and far between now, less of them now, that have a culture that they're trying to really keep hold of without getting washed away with all the policies. So I think it's a very mixed bag. Yeah.
It's very mixed. I agree, because I think it ties back to what you mentioned about every school is unique and every school is different. Every school has their own culture. You've
Yeah.
both mentioned about language a while ago, and another trend that I've mentioned during the introduction was bilingual pathways. So more than a third of schools are now offering them, which suggests that it is becoming more than just a curriculum decision. Going back to you, Zubia, looking at this from a strategic lens again, is the growth of bilingual pathways about mission? Is it about differentiation or survival for schools today?
I certainly think it's mission, differentiation, and survival. It's certainly all three of the kind of lenses that you're talking about, because depending on who's the stakeholder in the school, they will have a reason why bilingual pathways are important. So when we work with school groups, and this has happened a few times, or even owners or someone who has the noble intention to start a school, they want a feasibility study. So like ISC Research, they do research in that regard. We're also brought in as subject matter experts on this to kind of identify the opportunities in a particular demographic, in a target market, and understand what the needs are of that community. And when we do stakeholder voice for a particular community, invariably in the international arena, people want families, globally mobile families particularly, want their child to be happy. They want their child to be safe and happy. They want their child to be safe, happy, and be on a pathway that allows them to reach their potential. This is like universal parent requirements. But then they also don't want to be tied to a particular pathway if their family were to decide to move somewhere else. And we're in a world that is so fast paced. And we've seen in the Gulf, even in the last week, families moving for various own, personal choice reasons because of the flux. So that if you were in an IB school in Abu Dhabi, for example, and you've decided that you want to go to Europe and go to an IB school in Italy, the curriculum is allowing you, of course, there'd be some differences in how the curriculum's expressed in each individual school, but the curriculum allows that shift in a comfortable, in a relative, let's say, in a stabilizing manner where there are other unstabilizing factors like different geographic location, different language, and so forth. That curriculum part sometimes helps families to take their curriculum with them, if that makes sense. So yeah, I would say there is certainly a focus on, I'm just looking at my notes if there's anything else I wanted to say specifically. So there is certainly a choice factor, an agency factor. I want to be able to know what I'm doing for my children and giving them the best start. But also from a strategic perspective, I need to give my clients, if my clients are fee paying parents, what they want. So it's kind of like the demand driven, I'm going to give you a menu that has the things that you want on it. And we're not only seeing bilingual pathways, by the way, we're also seeing trilingual pathways. There are multiple schools across Europe and North Africa and even in the Gulf states that are offering trilingual pathways and using that as a USP for why their school stands out. So it's almost like it covers also marketing, branding, USP, as well as offering choice, but it's also like a feather in the cap sometimes, and really deeply embedded, rooted in the touch and feel and the climate of the school. So it really depends. So we're seeing a shift from it being a feather in the cap to it really needing to be the veins and arteries of the school and the lifeblood that pumps rather than just cosmetic. So I think that's the shift that aligns very much with the Global Snapshot report.
Hello, can you hear me? Sorry, that was my connection. Just to build on that last part that you've mentioned, do you think schools now that do not have or do not offer bilingual pathways, do you think, in your opinion, they risk losing competitiveness in certain markets?
Again, it depends because you have some clusters of communities where there is kind of like it feels like a region of a city or a region of a country where there is a concentration of a certain particular nationality, or there is a reason why, for example, in the oil and gas industry, you've got clusters of families that are maybe in particular areas that want to have a satellite kind of curriculum. They want to import something and have a kind of that kind of feel where they're not losing what is the native experience. Those are less and less these days because parents understand the value of multiculturalism. They understand the value of being multilingual. They see how their children, it's a lost opportunity to be in beautiful countries internationally, and their child be given sort of a very insular, blinkered pathway. And I think over time, more and more international families are being clearer on that's what we don't want. And I think that's an important thing. I think there's now a lot more respect for local identity and a local identity that's blurred. Like, for example, me, I'm British, yet I've lived here and back and forth to the UK for 20 years. So, and then I've got, different DNA as well. So I've got mixed cultural heritage. I'm not married to a Brit. Our children are completely international, and we have to remind them, everyone's human and everyone, we have to remind them in the sense that it doesn't matter. This matters more. And these are the ways people can feel belonging beyond just location, country, demographic, and so forth, but still celebrating what's special about each. So it's a really big conversation to have with 4 and 6-year-olds, but an important one, so that they understand who they are in the world. But yet they can choose as well. So I think to answer your question, would you become less competitive if you were serving an oil and gas community in the middle of nowhere? Probably not. Would you be less competitive because there's no other school there anyway, right? But if you were serving a very mixed market like Abu Dhabi, a growing one like Abu Dhabi or Dubai or in Doha, where there is a really cosmopolitan melting pot of people, yes, you would lose on competitiveness, because people do want their children to be exposed to the richness, because language is living. It's not just the words spoken or the grammar or the spelling. It's all the richness that comes with it, the clothing, the food, the expressions, the humor, the connection, the idioms. There's so much that language brings that brings people together more than divides people. So when people feel that richness, first, second, third generation, that is the beauty of why people want it. And beyond the commercial, I think humans crave it in a world that's becoming more and more anxious and digital. We crave, I think, that connection for ourselves and our children.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that, Zubia. Rhiannon, going back to you. With over a third of school now offering bilingual pathways, what impact are you seeing on international education more broadly?
Well, I think going back to what Zubir said, making that link with just as expat families need to know that they've got that flexibility for moving, and they can take their IB from somewhere in the Middle East to Rome, and they've got that adaptability. I also think it's really important for local families to know that they have the security. And of course, we wouldn't want this as educators, but sometimes parents and families choose a school and choose the bilingual model because their child will continue with their home language as well as a foreign language. So they have the security that if things change in this very rapidly changing world, they can also transfer their child back to local education if they need to. And I think some of our families need that security. It's a huge decision very often for them to commit to pay for an international school, and for them to have that security, because there can be a bit of fear at the beginning. They're sending their child to an international school. It's a system they don't quite understand. They don't know, what am I entering into? But at least if there's that bilingual provision, that gives me the confidence as a parent. Okay, well, they've got both languages or 3 languages, and that gives me the flexibility, even if we're not moving on, gives us the flexibility locally as well. Again, looking at it through a well-being lens, because I always will, I think looking at the bilingual pathways, there are some really important considerations, and especially for schools that are offering programs in 3 languages. So when we talk about well-being in schools, it's fundamental that it's not just student well-being. Of course, it's staff well-being. And if you have a bilingual curriculum or trilingual curriculum, of course, pressures on time, timetabling, curriculum demands, even the amount of homework you can set, ensuring that there's communication and collaboration between different teams. Could be very different teaching techniques, very different examination techniques, creating that sense of belonging for staff as well, so that you can unite your teams, both the local staff and the international staff. I think that's a really important part of our work as international schools. So recognising the demands of a bilingual curriculum on staff is really important. And also recognising the extra demands on students too, because of course, inevitably they'll probably be doing more work. The demands of the curriculum, even though schools try and divide it up and certain subjects will be in one language and certain in another, it can be really demanding. One of my personal frustrations is I might get told by a school, well, there's just too much in the curriculum, we don't have time for well-being. And that's where we go back to what Zubir said, is that parents want their children to feel happy and safe and that they belong. And those are prerequisites for learning. So well-being can't be sacrificed for curriculum, because actually the two go hand in hand. And very often it's sharing that really important message with both parents and staff. On a more practical level, working with a group, it's just in terms of language, in terms of staff training, parent webinars. We've had to think carefully about the delivery. Of course, I deliver all our wellbeing webinars in English. We have a series of staff training webinars every term, staff wellbeing webinars that we'll do in series of 5 or 10, and parent webinars every term. And initially, I was leading the webinar and sharing the recording, whereas now I'll create shorter videos, upload them to YouTube so that parents can access subtitles, and staff, because sometimes our staff aren't fully confident in English, so that we're being fully inclusive in terms of their access to everything as well. So there are just lots of different considerations that you need to think about to ensure that when we're delivering the bilingual and trilingual programs, that it can be incredibly inclusive, because it gives everybody that opportunity to use their strengths in different languages and celebrate them, an important part of their identity and so on. And also make sure that we're meeting the needs of those challenges too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rhiannon. It's really important that you've mentioned that while bilingual pathways offer both flexibility and security, it also comes with it not really challenges, but as you've mentioned, considerations that schools need to be prepared. Thank you.
Yeah.
You've also both mentioned about how schools are different. And I've mentioned during the introduction that around 40% of schools, international schools now, are part of a wider group network, which is changing how schools grow, how they share resources, and how they operate within a larger systems. But growth at scale, it also raises an important question. How do schools expand without losing the culture and identity that make them unique? Rhiannon, again, I'll like to start with you about this. From your perspective, how can schools grow? How can schools grow that while being part of a network, they still preserve the culture that defines them?
Well, I think that word unique is so important and absolutely fundamental. And Zubir identified that you can have siblings, but you can't have twins. And I caught that because I'm a twin myself and I have twins. So I caught the word. And it's so true. And respecting that individual identity of a school within a group is enormously important. So, for example, Globe Educate has 5 schools in Italy, but just because they're 5 schools in Italy, it doesn't necessarily make them any more similar than a school in between Italy and then Spain or France and so on. So respecting and celebrating those differences is really important, creating space and time for celebrating local traditions. We've just had Carnevale here in Italy. That's a really important part of the Italian culture. But at the same time, 2 weeks later, we've focused on Ramadan and supporting our Muslim students. And so it's about respecting, of course, the community and the needs of everyone within that community. So that's really important. But having that group culture is key as well. So, of course, onboarding schools and sharing that with them as they join the group for new schools that join. And then from a well-being perspective, we have a termly well-being theme. So, for example, one term it's been digital well-being, another healthy relationships, another social skills. And that theme is launched through a staff training webinar. A few weeks later, there's a parent webinar. Resources are shared every week. So everybody has those resources that express the shared values, the shared culture, the shared message that we want to portray and communicate and make and help everyone feel a part of, with the flexibility that I mentioned at the beginning to adapt according to their local needs and their context. And then also to create part of a strong kind of, to have that strong sense of belonging to the bigger group. We have a series of group events. Just last week, we had MUN at one of our schools in France. So students from all of the schools that want to participate visited and all joined together in one of our schools in France. Music events, sports events, so that everybody feels like they're part of something bigger. And here we are communicating our values and feeling like we're a part of something. And equally, our culture within our school is respected and can be upheld as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Rhiannon. How about, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, you both froze. So sorry.
Oh.
Going to you now, Zubia. Working closely with school leaders across different contexts, how do leaders maintain a strong school identity when they're operating within a larger group structure?
It's interesting because school leaders, school leadership, it's a wonderful and noble position to hold, but it's a major plate spinning activity, to have numerous demands on you at various strata of the school's provision, from reporting to boards, and it feeling very sort of organizational. You feel like you're a systems leader. A lot of principals are CEOs now, as well as principals, because of the scale of their organization, scale of their school's size and campuses, and multiple schools on one campus, across campuses. So there's that pressure there. And then at other levels, key functions that are completely compliance driven, safeguarding, and social work, and making sure communities are intact and children are safe. That's something that it has to be upheld irrespectively, and we need to be ready and subject to scrutiny for that. So there's a lot of pressure on school leaders to be all things to all people. And I think it's important that school leaders, more and more school leaders have had to widen their field of vision in who's feeling what and who wants what. And, more and more school leaders are having to listen to what their communities are asking for, and be bold enough, morally courageous enough to take what the data they gather, soft or hard data that they gather, and present that and be the advocate for the board, for the community. And that is extremely difficult. I've done it myself in principalships, and you're torn because, you're being employed, right, to have this role, but by the same token, you're representing the best interests of children's families and communities. And it's really, you have to toe the line in a manner that is so skillful. So I think, skillful sailors is principalship. Especially as more and more schools become part of groups. There's a lot more organizational complexity. There's a lot more focus on how to stabilize a group across multiple functions, shared services. There's a lot going on in schools. So I don't envy particularly all the developments that are happening now. It's a really demanding role. And I think a lot more energy from even ministries needs to focus on retaining leaders, because we're seeing leaders leave the profession as well. So if we want to have good schools, second only to the class teacher is strong leadership, effective leadership. that we've seen in research. So if leaders are not feeling able to have the support from their governing bodies and their owners and their executive leadership, they have to keep abreast with demographic shifts, geopolitical issues, switches from remote to online. So a lot of juggling, but listening, what can help? Listening, being measured, knowing knowing the sentiments of your each stakeholder group, measuring and checking that, and then acting in the best interests that kind of evens out across different groups. Another point that I'd like to mention, based on what Rihanna said earlier, which was about the siblings and twins thing, is that schools do need to know, if they're part of a group, what they're a beacon of. Like, what are we brilliant at? Because oftentimes we do focus on what schools aren't doing, deficit model. They aren't doing that. We're missing this thing is missing. They look at inspection reports and see what the recommendation, we're not good at this, we need to, and I think appreciative inquiry, strength-based approach, particularly in a group, you can form like a hive, right, of excellence in different areas and share amongst leaders. More than anything, leaders need networked, trusted connections between other leaders, because leadership's so lonely, and you can get inside your own head about so many things. So those trusted connections that you can build with other leaders in a similar role for role connections, are so critical. So I kind of long-windedly answered your question, I'm sorry, but it's kind of like a complex picture. But I do think leaders need more support from their boards to do the best work they can.
And I'd also like to mention, we've mentioned, Zubia, about the pressures that the school leaders have to face. And I realized that Rhiannon, when it comes, she always has this well-being perspective. There's, aside from student well-being, staff, teachers' well-being, there's also such a thing as leaders' well-being, right?
100%. Yeah. And I love what you just said, Zubia, about recognizing how lonely leadership can be, and the importance within groups. They automatically, in theory, have that network there, but of course it's really fundamental to provide opportunities for them to meet, to network with each other. I hate that expression, but to connect with each other and get to know each other, to build trust, so they start to use that network. Because of course, initially, if you enter a group, it might be a feeling of, oh, I don't want to share those things that are going around in my head, because I don't want to show weakness, or I don't want to express that it's challenging. But once that trust is built, I think that there's huge power in groups for providing that support network that can be really rare for leaders, because leadership loneliness is a really strong trend. And Dr. Helen Kelly has done a huge amount of work in leadership in international schools, and she identifies that as a core trend. And it's definitely something that needs to be recognised and supported more.
Yeah, it's a huge thing to always have that mask on. You know, you feel like you're wearing the reputation mask all the time as a leader. So even when you're meeting colleagues from another school, you're still the face of the school. Like, you feel like you're the cardboard cutout of the school, saying all the achievements of the school and all the brilliant things school. And to then have the vulnerability, the safe space to say, well, yeah, we're doing this really well, but I'm really stressed about ABC. To have the actual permission, so like to permit yourself to actually voice that and not feel weaker as a leader, is a huge piece that I do. So when I'm coaching leaders, it sometimes takes a few sessions for them to sort of, you know, if they're wearing a proverbial jacket, the leadership jacket, for them to even think about undoing some buttons and take it off and be the person inside. It takes a lot of thinking, introspection. But I think without that, leaders just can't, you know, their bodies give up as well. Your body tells you.
Burnout is a real risk.
Yeah.
Since we're discussing about leadership, many of the trends that we've discussed is really connected to leadership: local demand, bilingual pathways, consolidation. This suggests that international education may increasingly operating as a system level market rather than a collection of individual schools. So I'd like to close the panel with the leadership question for each of you. If this is the direction the sector is moving, what kind of leadership does this moment require? Zubia, from your perspective, what does strong leadership require today that it didn't 5 years ago?
Certainly an appreciation for complexity with new and emerging ways that things can be complex. And we've seen that with the banging the drum of AI that people have been banging for 3 years. I'm not going to talk about AI specifically because the conversation annoys me, because we just end up going round and round the same thing, which is keep the human in the loop, which is common sense. Okay, so yes, there's things like digital technology, screen time, and balancing digital education. We didn't talk about digital because Kai was going to kind of touch on that, but I do think the rise and fall and then balanced approach that we're having towards education, towards digital education, needs careful matching to the context. Because if we over digitize everything, the relationships and the connections and the ability for students to articulate their learning, there's missed opportunities there, because we're so focused on uploading and downloading information into the child's brain, a brain that needs things beyond just information. So, we've got young people who need to feel the outdoors. It's like, when we read the weather forecast and it says it's 26 degrees. 26 degrees can feel about 16 different ways, depending on the humidity, depending on the sunshine, depending on if you're by the sea, or all of that real feel is the climate of the classroom and the climate of the school. So 26 degrees in one place is not 26 degrees in Bali is not 26 degrees in the UK. So we need to understand why our children need what they need. And we need to have a very, very strong commitment to balance. And if that balance is off, we need to pivot and correct the balance. Sometimes school leaders go with a certain plan. We've got this digital transformation plan, or we've got this, or they can swing either way a bit too much. We've got outdoor education plan. We're doing away with the textbooks, no textbooks, just outdoor learning. And then the rigor suffers. The children don't have the structure or the schema or they can't follow explicit instruction. On the flip side, if it's too digital, then the children can't speak to it in a real world sense. And the people who are talking about outdoor education would say, well, you should have taken the children outside. That's why. And then there's this kind of like a camp, multiple camp, AI camp, digital camp, outdoor camp, and they're all kind of fighting amongst themselves. I think schools need to understand, as I said, what are you good at? Start with that and think, how can you branch out to do more of what your children need and want in pursuance of the pathway that you have, but in real world, in real time, in real field. The leaders who understand their context, the children and the goals, and keep the expectations high, but be realistic, feet on the ground, eyes up to the stars. Those are the leaders who maintain a semblance of stability that is critical for schools to actually grow. So that's my take on it.
Thank you. Thank you, Zubi. And Rhiannon, looking at the sector more broadly, what leadership mindset shift do you think matters most right now?
Well, ironically, I do think that this is the only good thing that potentially came out of COVID, because well-being had been a topic for many years beforehand, but COVID helped mark a real shift in schools being willing to prioritize it and recognize, wow, this is really important. And in some schools that happened during COVID, and then it dropped off again straight away. And I think the shift, I think people have made a lot of progress in the last 5 years. But I think there are still steps to be taken where well-being is truly a proactive approach, not reactive. So as Zubia mentioned earlier, schools are really good in terms of safeguarding compliance. We've really got that right within the international sector in many, many ways. But having a kind of proactive wellbeing program that is strongly led. This is where it comes from the leaders, because if you've got a wellbeing lead in your school who's going in and delivering staff training, but the head of school isn't there because they're in an important meeting, the message there just isn't clear. It needs to come really from the top that this is our absolute priority, with that core proactive approach. And I think we need all of those things that Zubia mentioned. We need the strong and the strategic leadership. We need that sense of balance. And we also need leaders who are empathetic and willing to show vulnerability. Now, when you use the vulnerability word, leaders tend to panic and think, oh no, what do you want me to do? Cry in front of my staff? No, I think it's as simple as Zubia said. Well, we've taken a direction. We've talked about, we're an outdoor learning school. Oh, we're beginning to sense it's not right. And vulnerability in a leader in that moment can be, I'm not quite sure what the next steps are. As a team, can we work it out together? So while strong leadership is important, I think vulnerability and willingness to be open to the people on the ground who are living and breathing it and saying, teaching staff, I really need your input in this because I can sense it's not quite right, but I can't quite work out why. I think that's where vulnerability in leadership is important. You know, vulnerability doesn't mean sitting in the staff room and offloading all your problems, but it does mean showing your staff. I think when as leaders, when we're willing to show our teams that sometimes we find it challenging and sometimes we don't have the answers, it helps them feel more valued, and it also gives them permission to do the same. It's an unspoken message of, okay, it's all right to admit that I haven't got the answers. It's all right to admit that I'm struggling. And I think getting that right as a leader is really fundamental in helping to develop a culture amongst your staff who will then do it with your students of, I'm willing to say when I'm not quite sure and I'm willing to ask for help. And I think that needs to be at the core of all our cultures in our schools.
I would say that's role modeling, the fact that you want people
100%.
to voice their professional thinking. So professional thinking is not always, I know exactly what to do. It's giving people the agency to say, okay, you see those children every day. What do you think is the next best step? And then we're there to try and strategically fund that, make sure the money's available to make that thing possible, to make sure that the provision, the timetabling, we work out what to do to create that. But knowing is taking the lead from the people who are on the front line. And without that sharing of professional thinking and the problematization, like, so I'm facing this is what I think the problem is. And people saying, well, actually, you think the problem is this, A, but actually the problem is C and D that you're not seeing. So we then solve C and D, and I'm solving A and B, we become aligned. So distributed leadership and agency is critical, and giving a voice to your thinking as a leader also makes you feel less lonely as well.
Yeah.
Thank you both. There are some really important ideas coming through from both of you, and I know that those who are watching are also taking down a lot of notes as me. But I'm opening the conversations now for the audience. There's one question from Matthias Olson. I understand the AI conversation can be a bit much at the moment, but with shifting demographics, fourth culture kids, and growing attention on staff well-being, the conversation is catching up to what many of us on the ground have been experiencing for a while. I see AI as a huge opportunity to free up space for the relational and intercultural work our international school communities are actually asking for. What happens when the school's older, more traditional identity hasn't caught up to its community? Would you like to answer this, Zubia or Rhiannon? Zubia?
I can go. Yeah, I've seen. So I do a lot. I do evaluations of schools, and I've seen the best of AI, the greatest hits so far, and also the teachers using AI to ask questions, the students using AI to produce questions, and everybody's using AI to do something other than think for themselves. So on the one end, so I'll start with the Rotten Tomatoes first. If it's taking away from cognition and you're offloading your ability to think, connect, and really have a meaningful discussion about the knowledge, skills, and understanding that you're embedding in the lesson, if that's being stripped away by AI, it should not be there in the learning environment for that purpose. If it's creating offshots from a central idea that you've embedded into the mind of the children, they've understood the concept, you've taught them some knowledge about something, and then given them spiraled around that, the offshots of how else they can understand or make sense of it. And then there's a route through which the children can go and create and be expressive. I'm with you all the way. I'm to the moon, to Mars. But unless we have that basis of good teaching, which has nothing to do with AI, it's to do with the relationship, the learning relationship between the teachers, the students, and the students and each other. Until those exist, if they are fragmented, we don't have learning. So we need to just be careful how we phrase the AI in the classroom.
Yeah.
Next.
I completely agree. On a personal basis, yesterday I was in the car for an hour and a half. I uploaded this white paper, my questions and all my answers to Notebook LM, turned it into a podcast and listened to the podcast in the car just to help me tune in. And that's where I just think that's where the power of AI lies.
Are we similar or different to it? Are we similar or different to the podcast?
It was really interesting, and also it quoted me back, and a couple of things it quoted. First of all, it was very bizarre hearing them quote me, and they didn't quite nail it perfectly, but it was really interesting to just hear how it was put together in a different way. And I think that's a great example of how AI can be used to not do that thinking, but help you use time efficiently and give you a different perspective on something, because it helped me pick up a couple of trends in the data that I hadn't spotted. And so I think it's about being brave enough as schools to experiment, encouraging your staff to experiment first to find what works, and then ensuring they guide students appropriately so it's being used in the right way. But it is tough in schools that have a more traditional approach. I know it's challenging. We've got a head of AI who's doing a great job of working with our schools, but responses vary, and you know, we're all working through the journey. As you said, all schools are on a journey, and the AI journey is a long one that will be constantly changing.
Another question is directed for you, Rhiannon. You've mentioned about vulnerability in leadership, and moving forward, do you think emotional intelligence is something that leaders need more support or training in to give them the strategies to do this comfortably?
I think emotional intelligence is absolutely fundamental, not just for leaders, for teachers, for students. It's our current focus this term, and in the resources that I share, it's professional development for staff as well as resources for students. It's really key. I do think as a really important part of that, and going back to what Zubir said about loneliness, if leaders don't have a supportive network, I think if it's so important they have a coach who does coaching with them to support them in that development of emotional intelligence, not to suggest that they don't have it, but just to help them shift perspective sometimes, to give them that self-awareness, to give them tools and strategies, because it's such a demanding role. And I think if you don't have a network because you're not part of a group, or you don't feel comfortable sharing within your group, finding some outlet is absolutely fundamental to overcome the loneliness, to receive the support, and to get that support from an emotionally intelligent human being, which one would hope all coaches are. So I would highly recommend coaching for all leaders if they haven't got that network around them.
Last question is from Shannon. She's interested to know about what you believe the issue of teacher retention will be addressed by international schools. She wanted to know what you think the future may look like for teachers and sustainable professional careers.
Zubia?
You'd like me to answer?
Yes, please.
I would say that there are more and more online schools that are utilizing teachers that are not necessarily in the same country, and Kai would tell you all about that and how digital education, having teachers overseas. I know of Minerva and many other schools that are utilizing a global workforce to deliver their curriculum, because they're specialist teachers in physics, which are finding a physics teacher is like gold dust. High school physics teacher is really challenging. So if there are teachers in other places that are trained and able to deliver at the curriculum standard, not having to ship to bring them over and pay, for the full package. There's a cost saving there for schools to not have to remunerate them financially, rather than needing to pay for the visas and all the other things. So I think there are huge opportunities to, I was going to say outsource, but it's not necessarily outsource, but to hire overseas and train. And I think those recruitment pathways are going to become more and more prevalent. They're already becoming more prevalent. I would also say that AI to some degree could help with some of carry some of the load of practice and engagement, particularly in the higher grades. When you're looking at exam classes, looking at how they're interacting and revising, there's opportunities there for some of the teaching load to be distributed amongst more teachers. I think leaders are going to become faster, smarter, and sharper on how to find the right talent and locate them and create a way for them to be contributing to their workforce. I think that part we're going to get more and more skilled at in the next 3 to 5 years.
Thank you. Thank you, Zubia. We're just about, I'm mindful of the time. We're just about the time that we have. So I'd like to thank again our panelists, Zubia and Rhiannon, for such a thoughtful and engaging discussion. We really appreciate you sharing your experiences and insights with us. If you'd like to keep the conversation going for both of them, they're both active on LinkedIn, I know, so I'd encourage you to connect with them. They're there. And thank you as well to our audience for being part of this conversation today. If you'd like to explore the data and trends we've discussed in more detail, the snapshot report is available to download online. And for ongoing insights into international education, we encourage you to follow ISC Research on LinkedIn and on YouTube, where we regularly share new research, sector updates, and upcoming events. Thank you again for being part of the conversation today, and we hope to see you again at the next ISC Research webinar.
Thank you,
Thank you, everybody.
Janelle. Thank you, Rhiannon. Thank you, Zubia, for a fantastic and fascinating conversation. I think, like always, when we run these events, we could keep talking for much longer. But yes, just to extend our thanks from all of ISC Research and to our community. If anyone has any further questions, then please do get in touch with us and we'll be able to pass them on. If you're interested in continuing the conversation and how this data might apply to your organization, whatever form that takes, there's a QR code on the screen there. And I also put a link in the chat. But for today, we'll wrap up. I hope you enjoy the rest of your days, wherever you are and whatever you're doing. Thanks again and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye. Bye.